I thought we had a great marriage. That was the hardest part, was just my life had to be completely adjusted. I didn't know what to do.
What happens when a young rising star falls for a man twice her age, believing she has found the love of her life, only to discover years later that the cost of that love was her career, her dignity, and her peace of mind? At 82, Linda Evans has spoken more openly than ever about her marriage to actor and director John Derek, and the truths she shares are far from the fairy tale the world once imagined. Behind the red carpets and Hollywood glamour was a relationship built on charm, control, and devastating betrayal. Evans admits now that she sacrificed everything, opportunities, friendships, and even her sense of self, in an effort to please him. But when another woman entered the picture, her world came crashing down in a way that left scars she carried for decades. Linda Evans was still carving her path in Hollywood when fate introduced her to John Derek. She was young, beautiful, and hopeful, with a career ready to rise. Derek, by contrast, was already well known, not only as an actor, but as a man whose looks and charisma fascinated the industry. Older and more experienced, he carried the kind of confidence that could sweep someone off their feet. For Evans, who longed for lasting love, Derek seemed to embody the charm and security she sought. Their early encounters brimmed with excitement. Derek had a way of making her feel like the only woman in the room. Hollywood is filled with fleeting connections, but Evans believed this was different. The age gap did not trouble her. In fact, she saw it as a strength. He had lived a life she could learn from, and his maturity seemed like a promise of stability. Friends, however, saw warning signs. Derek's reputation with women was far from spotless, and whispers circulated about his tendency to move on quickly once the novelty faded. Evans, full of optimism, brushed those doubts aside. She trusted her feelings and convinced herself their bond was unique and destined to last. She was not only in love with Derek, but with what she believed they could build together. She pictured herself as his partner in both life and art, supporting his ambitions and inspiring his creativity. In her mind, marriage would be about building something greater than themselves, a dream that felt just within reach. Those close to her later reflected that Linda was drawn as much to Derek's potential as to the man himself. She believed in what he could become, and that faith blinded her to the cracks already showing beneath the surface. Hollywood glamour can disguise flaws with dazzling lights, and Evans, like many before her, fell for the illusion. What began as a hopeful love story would soon transform into a difficult journey of control, sacrifice, and betrayal. The very qualities that once made Derek magnetic would eventually reveal themselves as destructive forces. But in those early moments, all Linda Evans saw was the promise of love, and she was willing to give everything she had to make it work. Long before Linda Evans entered his life, John Derek had already built a reputation that followed him everywhere. In Hollywood, he was admired for his striking good looks, which earned him roles alongside icons like Humphrey Bogart and Joan Crawford. But it was not only his on-screen presence that drew attention, it was his relationships. Derek's personal life often overshadowed his career, and that reputation trailed every romance he pursued. His first marriage was to actress Patty Bears in the 1940s. They had children, and, for a time, seemed like a typical Hollywood family. But Derek's wandering eye soon led him elsewhere. In the 1950s, he fell for Swiss actress Ursula Andress, who later gained fame as the first Bond girl in Dr. Number. The affair destroyed his first marriage, and he wed Ursula in 1957. Passion burned hot at first, but by the mid-1960s, the marriage collapsed. Again, whispers spread that Derek had a habit of moving on when something new caught his attention. Insiders described him as charming yet unreliable. Friends said he thrived on admiration, but struggled with commitment. Behind closed doors, women spoke of a controlling streak, a need to shape not only his own life, but theirs as well. It was a stark contrast to the suave image he projected publicly. When Linda Evans stepped into his world, she knew of his past: marriages, divorces, and rumors. Yet, like many in love, she believed she could be the exception. She thought their bond was stronger, deeper, and unlike anything he had known before. Evans later admitted she believed her devotion could quiet the restless spirit that always pulled him away. That belief became one of the defining struggles of her marriage. Derek's history history had laid out clear warnings, but Evans chose to see only the man who made her feel chosen and adored. She ignored the trail of broken relationships, convinced her story would end differently. But history has a way of repeating itself. John Derek's patterns were far from finished, and Linda Evans was about to discover just how devastating they could become. In 1968, Linda Evans and John Derek married, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though Evans had secured the stability she longed for. To the outside world, they looked like a glamorous couple. She was radiant and rising, he was seasoned and confident. But what appeared to be a Hollywood dream was, in reality, far more complicated. Once the vows were exchanged and the cameras faded, the dynamics of their relationship shifted in ways Evans could not have anticipated. From the start, Derek made it clear that he wanted to be the center of their marriage. He discouraged Evans from pursuing roles that might elevate her career beyond his shadow. Friends and colleagues noticed that Linda, once ambitious and determined, began turning down opportunities, projects that could have transformed her into a leading star, even before her Dynasty fame. Derek, by contrast, pushed forward with his own projects, especially his aspirations as a director. Evans later admitted that she sacrificed many opportunities simply to keep him happy. The control was subtle at first. Derek did not demand, but rather persuaded. He would tell her that certain roles were not right for her, or that she did not need to work as much because he would take care of things. Over time, these suggestions turned into expectations, and Evans found herself stepping away from the very career she had worked so hard to build. She believed that standing behind her husband's ambitions was what love required, but the cost was her independence. Behind closed doors, Derek's charm could quickly turn to coldness if things did not go his way. Evans recalled moments of isolation, where she felt more like a supporting character in his story than a partner in their marriage. He was a man who needed control, and in giving him that control, Evans lost more of herself than she realized. The young actress, who once brimmed with confidence, was gradually reshaped into someone who measured her worth by how much she pleased her husband. To outsiders, the couple still looked enviable. They attended events together, posed for photographs, and maintained an air of elegance. But beneath the surface, the cracks were already forming. Evans was silencing her own voice, trading her potential for his approval. It is a dynamic many women of her generation would recognize, believing that love meant sacrifice, even when that sacrifice came at a devastating personal cost. Linda Evans would later confess that these early years were some of the most damaging of her life. She said she gave up too much, and that realization haunted her long after the marriage ended. But at the time, she could not yet see it. All she knew was that she was in love, and she was willing to do whatever it took to hold on to it. What she did not know was that her sacrifices would not save the marriage. Instead, they set the stage for a betrayal so profound that it would change her life forever. If Linda Evans thought her sacrifices would secure John Derek's loyalty, she was tragically mistaken. In the mid-1970s, a young teenager named Mary Kathleen Collins entered their lives. She was stunning, wide-eyed, and eager to break into the film industry. Under John Derek's guidance, she would eventually be transformed into Bo Derek, a name that became synonymous with beauty and fame in the years to come. But for Linda Evans, her arrival marked the beginning of the end. John Derek saw in Bo what he had once seen in every new muse: youth, beauty, and a chance to mold someone into his vision of perfection. Evans, who had already given up so much of herself for him, watched as her husband became increasingly obsessed with this new figure in their orbit. The relationship between Derek and Bo started quietly, in whispers and rumors, until it became impossible to ignore. What made the situation unbearable was not only the betrayal itself, but the circumstances around it. Bo was shockingly young, just a teenager when she first connected with Derek. While Linda Evans was trying to maintain her marriage, her husband was slipping away, chasing a dangerous and scandalous attraction. Hollywood buzzed with whispers, and Evans, once admired for her grace and beauty, suddenly found herself humiliated in the most public of ways. For Linda, the heartbreak was compounded by the realization that everything she had sacrificed, Her career, her independence, her sense of self had been for nothing. She had built her marriage around Derek only to watch him dismantle it with a betrayal that crossed every imaginable line. It was not just infidelity, it was a complete abandonment of the vows they had shared. When John Derek finally left Evans and went on to marry Bo in 1976, the scandal made headlines. The images of Derek with his much younger wife were splashed across tabloids, and Linda's heartbreak became part of Hollywood gossip. Friends later recalled how dignified she tried to remain, even as her world fell apart. But inside, the pain was overwhelming. Evans described those years as some of the darkest of her life. She had given her heart fully, only to be discarded for someone else, someone decades younger. It was the kind of humiliation that would have broken many people completely. And yet, Linda Evans endured it, even as she struggled to rebuild herself from the ruins of her marriage. But while her personal life was in shambles, the next chapter of her story would prove that she was far from defeated. In fact, it was through her pain that she would rise to her greatest professional triumph. The end of Linda Evans's marriage to John Derek was not just a personal tragedy, it became a public spectacle. In Hollywood, the downfall of a famous couple often turns into entertainment, and Evans found herself in the crosshairs of a media frenzy. The story had everything the tabloids craved: youth, betrayal, and scandal. John Derek leaving his elegant actress wife for a teenager was explosive, and reporters could not resist turning Linda's heartbreak into front-page drama. For Evans, the humiliation was relentless. Headlines painted her as the abandoned woman, the star left behind for someone younger. Photographers hounded her in public, searching for signs of despair. Friends recall that she handled it with remarkable poise, keeping her head high even as gossip swirled. But behind closed doors, she was devastated. Years later, she admitted that she felt utterly broken, describing the betrayal as something that shattered her sense of self. What made the pain sharper was the way Hollywood reacted. Some colleagues and friends offered support, recognizing how unfairly she had been treated. Others, however, treated it like a story to laugh about over cocktails at parties. The cruelty of an industry built on appearances became clearer than ever to Evans. She was left to endure not only the loss of her marriage, but also the spectacle of people discussing it as though it were entertainment. And yet, in the midst of all this, Linda Evans showed resilience. Instead of disappearing, she turned her focus inward, determined to rebuild her life. While John and Bo Derek flaunted their relationship in the public eye, Evans quietly began piecing herself back together. She poured her energy into healing and rediscovering the strength she had long suppressed. Her career, which had taken a back seat during her marriage, was waiting for her. Opportunities began to open again, and Linda realized she still had the talent, the presence, and the star power to command the screen. The betrayal that could have silenced her instead became the spark that reignited her career. This was the turning point. Out of heartbreak came resilience, and from resilience came success. For Linda Evans, the years that followed would bring not only recovery, but also a role that defined her legacy and placed her among television's most iconic figures. By the late 1970s, Linda Evans had endured the deepest heartbreak of her life. She had been betrayed, humiliated, and left to start over from nothing. But sometimes, out of devastation comes opportunity. And for Evans, that opportunity arrived in the form of a television role that would forever change her life. In 1981, she was cast as Krystle Carrington in the primetime soap opera Dynasty. The timing could not have been more perfect. After years of living in John Derek's shadow, Evans now stepped into the spotlight on her own terms. Krystle Carrington, the glamorous yet compassionate wife of oil tycoon Blake Carrington, became one of the most beloved characters on television. Week after week, millions tuned in not only for the wealth and scandals of the Carrington family, but also to see Evans bring grace, strength, and vulnerability to the screen. What made the role so powerful for Evans was how it mirrored her own journey. On screen, she played a woman navigating power struggles, betrayals, and heartbreak in a world of wealth and glamour. Off-screen, she was still healing from the scars of her marriage. Fans saw the elegance, but behind it was a woman who understood pain intimately. That authenticity gave her performance depth and made Krystle Carrington more than just a glamorous figure. She became relatable. Dynasty was a cultural phenomenon, and Linda Evans rose with it. She earned a Golden Globe Award and countless accolades, securing her place as one of television's most recognizable stars of the 80s. More importantly, the role gave her independence. Financially, it made her secure. Emotionally, it gave her confidence. After years of being told she was not enough without John Derek, she proved that she was more than capable of thriving on her own. The irony was not lost on her. While John Derek pursued projects with Beau, often criticized for being shallow or self-serving, Linda Evans was achieving the greatest success of her career. The very man who once discouraged her from chasing opportunities was now watching her flourish in ways he could never have imagined. In many ways, Dynasty was her triumph, not just as an actress, but as a woman who had survived betrayal and turned her pain into power. Still, even as she dazzled millions of viewers every week, the memories of her marriage lingered. The glitz of the Carrington estate could not completely erase the scars left by John Derek, but Evans had something she had not felt in years: control of her own destiny. And with that control came the strength to finally tell her story, not as the abandoned wife, but as a survivor who had risen far beyond the heartbreak. As the years passed and the glimmer of Dynasty faded into television history, Linda Evans found herself in a place of deeper reflection. Away from the bright lights and magazine covers, she began to speak more candidly about her past, particularly her marriage to John Derek. By the time she reached her later years, her perspective had shifted from heartbreak to wisdom. She no longer spoke as the abandoned wife of a Hollywood scandal, but as a woman who had lived, learned, and survived. In interviews, Evans revealed how much she had given up for love. She admitted that she had stepped back from her career not because she lacked ambition, but because she thought it was her duty to support her husband's dreams. With time, she came to see that decision as one of her greatest mistakes. "I gave up too much," she once said, a simple statement that carried the weight of decades of regret. Those words resonated with countless women who had made similar sacrifices in relationships that did not value their worth. She also opened up about John Derek himself, describing him as charismatic, yet destructive. She acknowledged his talent and undeniable charm, but did not shy away from admitting how controlling he had been. At the same time, she refused to paint herself only as a victim. Instead, Evans took responsibility for the role she played in enabling the dynamic. She admitted that her loyalty blinded her, and that she ignored red flags because she desperately wanted the marriage to work. That honesty made her reflections all the more powerful. What struck many people was the lack of bitterness in her words. Despite the betrayal, despite the public humiliation, Evans chose not to dwell on anger. Instead, she spoke about growth, resilience, and the lessons she carried forward. She explained that her pain ultimately shaped her into the woman she became, stronger, wiser, and far more compassionate toward herself and others. Even into her 80s, she has continued to speak openly about the importance of self-worth and the dangers of losing oneself in love. She reminds her audience that sacrifice, while noble, should never come at the cost of one's identity. Her willingness to expose her own vulnerabilities has turned her story from one of scandal into one of survival. Through her later reflections, Linda Evans offered something far more valuable than gossip or scandal. She gave people a glimpse of the truth behind the Hollywood facade, and in doing so, she showed that even the most painful chapters of life can lead to strength, healing, and clarity. Looking back at her life, Linda Evans carries a legacy that goes far beyond the glamour of Dynasty or the heartbreak of her marriage to John Derek. Her story is not just about betrayal, but about resilience, and not just about loss, but about rediscovering her own strength. At 82, she has become a living testament to survival, honesty, and the courage to tell one's truth, no matter how painful. For many, the most striking part of her journey is the contrast between what the public once believed and what was really happening behind the scenes. To fans, she was the radiant blonde who seemed to have everything: beauty, fame, and success. In reality, she endured manipulation, sacrifice, and humiliation that could have destroyed her spirit. Instead, she chose to rebuild, using her pain as fuel to rise higher than ever before. Her willingness to finally expose the reality of her marriage has turned her story into more than a Hollywood scandal. It has become a cautionary tale. She reminds us of the danger of giving too much of ourselves in the name of love, of ignoring red flags because we want to believe in someone else's potential, and of staying silent when we should be protecting our own worth. These are lessons that resonate far beyond Hollywood, touching anyone who has ever loved too deeply and lost too much. And yet, her life is not defined by tragedy. Evans has made it clear that she does not live with bitterness. Instead, she celebrates the freedom she found after breaking away, the success she achieved on her own terms, and the wisdom she has gathered along the way. Her story inspires not because of what she endured, but because of how she transformed it. Today, when she speaks of John Derek, it is not with venom, but with clarity. She recognizes the damage, but also the growth that came from it. She has reached a place of peace, one where her identity is no longer tied to the man who betrayed her, but to the woman who survived and thrived. That transformation is her greatest victory. In the end, Linda Evans's life reminds us that beauty and fame do not shield anyone from heartbreak. What matters is what comes after: the strength to stand again, the courage to speak out, and the wisdom to never lose oneself in love. Her story, raw and unfiltered, is one of the most powerful reminders that sometimes survival is the greatest triumph of all. If you found Linda Evans's story as powerful and eye-opening as we did, do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more untold Hollywood stories. Hit the like button if you believe her resilience deserves recognition, and share this video with someone who could use inspiration from her journey. And stay tuned, because the next story we bring may just surprise you even more.